So most important of all, everyone watching, please go to the subscribe button and subscribe now. It's not as though we're going into rivalry with the Team House, but we are starting as an offshoot franchise, okay, with under the lauded Jack Murphy media empire. And so please give us a boost, otherwise we'll get fired, with the exception of D, of course, and no one wants that to happen. So do so now, and who knows, we may make 140,000 subscribers by the end of the day, D.
Hope you're right. Yeah. So the link is in the description for the new Eyes on YouTube channel. So go ahead and go to the description, click that link, and click subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Eyes On. I'm Andy Milburn.
I'm Jason Lyons.
Dimitri Kontakos.
D, what do we have lined up today?
It's a lot cooking. First and foremost, we were talking before the show about what's going on. It seems like there's going to be an imminent attack on Iran from Israel. Yeah, that's
already publicized.
Yeah,
this is old news. That's out in the open source. Sadly. Yeah, no, exactly right. That is, that's part of the story, but the attack itself now is not the main story. The main story is the fact that news of such an attack was leaked, number one, and number two, that the US administration is saying, or not actually, when I say that, not publicly, but that they are they are confident that Israel will not attack either the nuclear facilities or Iran's oil infrastructure or reserves, which were the two big questions, because we didn't want the global economy to be sent down the toilet, and also the obvious escalatory ramifications with going after nuclear facilities. Now, whether we've changed Netanyahu's mind remains to be seen. In other words, whether this was really a mind change, or whether he'd already resolved to do what he's going to do and avoid those two things, or who knows whether the extreme right within Israel will still sway him into taking stronger action, although that does, admittedly seem unlikely. So when I suppose, I mean, it's so difficult when you're tracing the cause and effect in this type of thing, and I'm not trying to do so by mentioning the Hezbollah drone attack that exploded near Netanyahu's home on the 19th. He's got a country home out in Caesarea, very nice place, and neither he nor his wife, no members of his family were home. The blast did hit the house, caused damage, no casualties. But he takes these things takes these things very personally. And there was an incident back in 2019 when he was talking to an audience, and an attack by a rocket attack by, I think it was Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Yes, it was definitely interrupted this political rally, and he had to be rushed off the stage by his bodyguards, and the photographs were in Israeli media. Okay, now, a lot of people would think, okay, that's kind of cool as leader of the country, being shown also to share the same dangers as their people. But this isn't what Netanyahu wants. He doesn't want to share the same dangers. And he found those, the pictures back then very humiliating. And apparently, he drove to the headquarters, the Kiryat, the headquarters of the Israeli Defense Ministry, and ordered the killing of Islamic Jihad leader Bahu Abu al-Atta, right, 2019. So, my point is, he makes decisions reflexively based on threats to himself personally. So let's not discount that attack, and the effect of that attack. That having been said, that these mysterious Israeli and American security sources who keep discussing things in sidebars to the media are apparently saying that there is a U.S.-Israeli understanding. It's been reached, promising to reward Israel from refraining from attacking Iran's oil industry and nuclear power infrastructure. And in return, the conversation is going to include lifting U.S. suspension of certain arms and ammunition shipments to Israel, and even accelerating their supply, right? To include the famous D9 bulldozer, which has been a mainstay of Israeli operations in Gaza. Indeed, the D9s. The D9, as anyone has been involved in an urban fight in the last 2 decades, the D9 will tell you, anyone will tell you, is worth its weight in gold. It's like a combat bulldozer, and it has multiple uses. And it is, in many ways, more useful than a tank in those environments. The only thing it lacks, of course, is a significant direct fire capability. But now that there's so many ways to protect such a thing, especially in an environment like Gaza, it's an iconic and very effective weapon. Although perhaps we're not going to see a rush to be a D9 bulldozer driver anytime soon in the US MOS lineup. But in any case, so they were also involved in apparently in this agreement to provide compensation for the Israeli restraint has been an agreement to step up U.S. attacks on Houthi weapons depots and other strategic targets in Yemen. Cynics might say, for what it's worth, for all the good that has done to date. But there is a feeling now that those are becoming increasingly effective as U.S. intelligence perhaps gets a little more acute, on a topic that we have discussed here. And the U.S. has already, the last strike we did was on the 16th, I think.
B2s.
And it was, yeah, that's right. And then they went off at a major Houthi weapons depot. And by all accounts was effective. So we shall see. And maybe I should not be a cynic about our ability to suppress the Houthis.
Andy, a little bit that B2 that B2 hit. There was talk about it being more of like a strategic play, showing Iran like, hey, because like why would we use B2s? For hitting Houthi targets. I just wanted to point that out because like when it happened, people were talking about how it's like a strategic move to show Iran like, hey, what's what? Like we're here.
Yeah, I think there were 3 reasons. One was Iran. Second was Israel, to show, hey, look, we really are serious about that. And the Israelis now care about the Houthis because the Houthis have been striking into Israel with limited success, but they did get a missile into Tel Aviv, which was symbolically a big deal, and inflicted casualties. But what was I? Yeah, so those 2 reasons. And then the third reason, of course, is that if you're a B2 pilot, you're watching your career go down the shitter because all your compadres are getting plenty of trigger time or toggle time or whatever they call it in the Air Force. And, even the drone dudes, in Nellis are getting PTSD and stuff and medals galore. Whereas the B2 guys are stuck in that. Where are they stuck in that base in the
Missouri?
Middle East? I forget where. I mean, not Middle East,
Missouri,
Midwest. Yeah, Missouri. Yeah. And there's nothing to relieve their routine. So I think I'm only half joking here. That played into it too. I'm sure there was a B2 pilot, senior B2 pilot involved in the planning of this whole thing. I mean, the strategic level decision to use that platform. And then, on the topic of compensation, the Pentagon is said to be considering, all right, I love that vague phrase, deployment of a second THAAD anti-missile battery in Israel. And THAAD is also a big deal. The Israelis, their 3-tier air defense system is effective, but not effective enough to stand against another onslaught, perhaps like the one that Iran sent by itself. All right. Israel knows it's never going to have to do that by itself. But nevertheless, I don't, everyone's aware that perhaps it has not seen its full saturation where there is an external attack and then you have two internal groups, Hezbollah and Hamas, attacking Israel at the same time. A possibility that until recently seemed very likely, but now seems increasingly unlikely because neither Hamas nor Hezbollah is probably physically capable of launching such an attack. And Iran just doesn't, there's nothing to benefit Iran by doing so. And if you look at all of the rhetoric coming out of Tehran now, it is de-escalatory. That's the last thing Iran wants is to go to war right now. So the THAAD battery, yeah, it's symbolic, but on the other hand, it really does bolster an element of what the Israelis used to be concerned about being one of their critical vulnerabilities, their defense, their vulnerability to being overwhelmed by a mass simultaneous attack. So what are the Israelis going to attack?
So you said like it's going to be a bit of like anodyne like kind of attack, right? Because we paid them off. Isn't it a bit crazy that we're basically or expediting what we were going to give them already? That we're talking them off the ledge of like hitting nuclear facilities or oil fields or whatever, or make like a real deal attack with just arms. Like, isn't that nuts? Or I mean, it's probably the way we do business anyway, like in the world, but it seems like we're being very blasé about it.
Yeah, I think I think it's far from nuts. I think if you look at some of the best US foreign policy over the ages, going all the way back to the early part of the 20th century, Middle East, in the interactions in Middle East history, the the carrot and the stick. The carrot and stick's always been something that we use with effective diplomacy. And we know persuasion by itself doesn't matter at all. And it doesn't count much at all, especially arguably as the United States opposition in the world stage becomes, some would say, less prominent, right? And we are no longer the indispensable ally to Israel that we thought we once were. I think Israelis are starting to think, hey, we can do this by ourselves. And especially now with this leak, the United States alliance does seem, especially to right-wing Israelis, as more of a liability than a help. And so I suppose under the principle of striking while the iron is hot, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken arrived in Israel yesterday morning. And his first stop in a regional tour, but clearly he's there to not just monitor Israeli preparation for a possible attack, but to limit its extent. And he's probably arguing that having killed the heads of both Iran's main regional proxies in recent weeks, Hezbollah chief Nasrallah and Hamas head Yahya Sinwar, the path's now clear for Israel to reach arrangements ending the war on all fronts, if that's what Israel wants to do. So in a sense, I hate to say the region has reached this decision point or a historic crossroads, but in a sense it has. According to Israeli assessments, Hezbollah wants to end the war. All right, not even in even in 2006, that message wasn't. They weren't getting such a clear message. But they've now been dealt the worst blow in their history, and they're exhausted. Iran wants to end it, as I pointed out, and Hamas has stopped functioning as a government or a military body. It's got no leadership at all. All right, Mahmoud Sinwar, unlikely. I mentioned his name as Sinwar's brother because he's the most extreme of those who are left, but he's buried deep somewhere in Gaza, either alive or dead, and has no influence. So the authority has defaulted to the political leadership, and they have always been more moderate than the military leadership of Hamas. So or situate, or, from a point of view of Israel's adversaries, things seem right now. Things seem to be in the right place for some kind of settlement. Okay. But, all right, Black Swan, Ben-Gvir and the hardliners in Netanyahu's Likud party, who don't want the war to stop until Hezbollah and Hamas are crushed to a pulp. And this week, on Monday, there was a rally attended by Ben-Gvir and other Knesset members. All right, Ben-Gvir in particular is a cabinet member, calling for the rebuilding of Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip, which Israel dismantled in 2005. In other words, saying, hey, look, now we've purged this whole area, let's move back in. And you can't dismiss, I mean, these people were once a fringe movement within Israeli society, but no longer. And these kind of megalomaniac ambitions you're hearing among mainstream politicians like Ben-Gvir, like who's the other guy, Smotrich, and we keep using those two names, but they represent a sizable and influential part of Israeli politics. And then you add to that, okay, so Blinken's already out there. You add to that U.S. mediator Amos Hochstein. Okay, he's now on the ground trying to engineer a deal between Israel and Hezbollah. All right, and not with Iran or anything, but he's focusing specifically on the local area. And he's saying that there needs to be a new mechanism to enforce UN Resolution 1701, which ended the 2006 war, which everyone realizes there needs to be. But the question is, who can enforce that? And is it enforceable? Okay. And we've talked about a little bit that before. Now, for the first time, this is from, kind of his perspective, I think. Now, for the first time, the Lebanese government no longer has the boa constrictor of Hezbollah around its neck, and it can make policy decisions such as enforcing an internationally agreed mandate without opposition. Okay, that's how the US is thinking. However, on the ground, a little bit different. Okay, so the 1701 resolution calls for all armed militias to be pulled back north of the Litani River. And okay, that makes sense, all right. But there's a couple of reasons why that alone, it's going to be hard to enforce, and even if they do enforce, it's not going to be particularly effective. Okay, effective. Number one is the rank and file of Hezbollah is heavily embedded in the towns and villages south of Litani. In other words, there were families whose husband and brothers within that family, all the male members, are part of Hezbollah, right? And, they may do other things. It may not be a full-time job, but they are Hezbollah fighters. And for a number of them, it is a full-time job, right? So it's more than just moving a militia north, when you have an organization like that heavily embedded in the local community. And number two, even, obviously with the ranges of the rockets and missiles that Hezbollah has now, most of the long-range rockets, those that are surviving, are up north, either in the Bekaa Valley or vicinity of Beirut. They're not south of the Litani River. So simply moving people, militias, weapons is not going to work. But what might work is a concerted effort to disarm, to disarm people south of the Litani River, right? So
leave them in place. Leave them in place, but disarm.
Yeah. I just don't see how they have any other option to leave them in place. What are you going to do? You're going to have to drive the whole population north of the Litani River, and that's not what the resolution says. Nevertheless, okay, that's kind of my cynicism. The Israelis are still saying we need an arrangement that moves Hezbollah north of the Litani River and strengthens the Lebanese central government. Because if 1701 is not enforced, then the Israelis will remain there to do so. Arguably, although they don't want to remain there. And then so Hezbollah, but the advantage though for the side of I don't know, it's peace, I guess. The advantage here is that Hezbollah, as I said, does seem now to want a respite, right? Obviously, and so if there's any time to do this, it is now. And at the same time, with Hamas, there's an opportunity to renew negotiations for a deal. There's, people forget, well, not families are hostages, but in the States, it is sometimes forgotten. There are still some 100 and so hostages in Gaza, right? Haven't been recovered, 105, I think it is. And so negotiations to free them and halt the fighting in Gaza is still a priority. And as I mentioned earlier, now there's been this shift in the balance of power within Hamas since Hamas killing that passes the baton to Hamas's exiled political leadership, which, as I've said, is far more moderate. And then the last time you mentioned the Egyptians, right?
Yeah.
And as being kind of unhelpful. Well, I think a lot of Israelis might agree with you, but interestingly enough, so the Egyptians had a long time head of their intelligence, and this is quite unusual in any intelligence service, perhaps except for Western, CIA, for an intelligence chief to almost have kind of rock star status. But Abbas Kamal did. He was very well, he was feared and revered, I suppose, within certain circles in the West. Abbas Kamal, and he's well known to the Israelis. And they certainly they could negotiate with him, but there was always a feeling that he was keeping some cards on the side and not giving a full court press to Israeli Hamas negotiations. Well, his replacement's a guy named Hassan Mahmoud Rashad, unknown quantity, but certainly determined to prove himself, and seems, for him, perhaps the sign of success would be for the negotiations to go ahead, and it would be a just kind of great feather in his cap if he could make that happen. So the conditions are ripening for there to be a peace settlement. That's not to say that there will be one.
Do you think any of this is going to be or is being slow rolled for the sake of the U.S. elections to see what the outcome is going to be? And
that's a great point, Jason. And there is no doubt about it that around the world, everyone is watching U.S. elections because for possible outcome. There is no doubt about it that Trump and Netanyahu are far closer than anyone likely in a Democrat candidacy. And in fact, Trump called Netanyahu a good man recently. So the Israelis certainly have an eye on that. When I say the Israelis, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't act as though they're homogenous and all that. But I meant the right wing of the Likud party undoubtedly is awaiting that eventuality, possibility. Are you guys? So before we get into this leak, which is, in the end, like we've said before, when you look at what was in that leak, it's nothing really to see here, but nevertheless, the leak itself is significant. Top secret information, leaked on purpose. And what this stuff shows, and it looks, if you're following this on Twitter, there's a school of thought on Twitter, right? An informed school of thought that thinks that this came from the office of the Secretary of Defense himself. You can't prove that, obviously, at this stage, because actually this is stuff that comes from, what am I thinking, Jason? The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, right? So it's, it's I should have just said NGA. which analyzes satellite imagery, and also, the NSA, which does communications intercept. So it's coming from more than one. It's coming from two agencies. So the leak is likely to have been more central, but that's not to say that it could have come through any number of hands as it was passed into OSD's office.
Yeah, I was reading. I'm sorry, in
Sorry,
the
go ahead, yeah.
Jerusalem. I was reading in the Jerusalem Post that apparently a name is being floated around as a possible source of the leak, which the Pentagon denies. Her name is Ariane Tabatabai, Chief of Staff for the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations. Again, Pentagon is saying that's not true. FBI obviously would have the lead on this, so they would be the final say on whether that's true or not. But apparently she was under fire back in 2023. Some members of Congress, wanted her fired.
Iranian connections, right?
Yeah, because her
family members.
Communication. Yeah, so she I guess she's in the spotlight again.
Yeah, not just Iranian family members, but pro-Iranian. Allegedly pro-Iranian family members. Yeah, I remember all that. I haven't heard anything more on that.
Yeah.
But I do know, the documents, what they describe is nothing surprising. It just, it involves, and Jason, I don't even know, do we talk about it with violating? I don't think we can even talk about it. But
can I talk about it?
The point is, I don't know, man. Let's move on.
Okay.
But it's not, it's got to do with capabilities, and it's not it's not. My point is, it's not earth-shattering. It's not a serious blow. Yeah.
I mean, they read executive summaries. There's no imagery.
It's just the fact that it was.
Yeah.
It's just it's just talk. It's just talk about capabilities, and I think what I'm reading is it the question is it a leak or is it a hack? And if it is a leak, is it an intentional leak? Meaning, did someone in the Pentagon, in the U.S. government, say, okay, let's let this slip out purposely? I don't know what for. Or was it leaked by someone trying to derail this whole thing? So again, FBI would have the lead on it. They would want to know who had access to the documents, all the way up the chain, who has the most likelihood of wanting to leak something like this, whether it's to derail it for monetary gain, stuff like that. So there's definitely an active counterintelligence investigation going on, and we're just going to have to wait to see. But at the end of the day, when this first happened, people got together and said, what is the damage to Israel here and to the US? And it's really, there isn't any,
there isn't. No, I mean, you could have just assumed what was in these documents, that the Israelis were doing those things. So, but to your point, I think it's clearly pointing now to a purposeful leak, because it was screenshots of the documents that appeared on a Telegram channel. That alone doesn't differentiate it from a hack, but the FBI is saying, not the FBI, but at least official statements are now saying that it was most likely not a hack.
And it would have benefited if it was a hack. It would have benefited if it was Iran for them to say, look at what we found, instead of letting someone else take the credit for it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, what's concerning is, of course, this isn't the first significant leak of sensitive intelligence, right? In the last few years. Last year there was that, a tranche of classified U.S. assessments of the war in Ukraine and other foreign policy matters appeared on Discord, right? And that was that guy. What was his name? Jack. He was something or other.
Yeah, the National Guard. National Guard did. Yeah.
And he's an enlisted airman in the Massachusetts Air National Guard. So you could say, well, what has that got to do with policy or anything? Well, it has everything to do with policy, or it has because we need to know is a key part of sharing classified information. And there was just, when you trace all of this, there was just no way that this dude needed to know that stuff.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
if this, and I don't know, that may have been a local policy. It may have been just a local commander being an idiot and not adhering to national security policy. But definitely a violation, and it had outsized ramifications. A junior dude in his early 20s,
Jack
gamer,
Teixeira, that's his name.
yeah, a gamer causing damage to U.S. national security. But we allowed that to. I mean, we allowed that to happen by giving them this information.
Well, frankly,
right?
I'm pretty surprised it doesn't happen more often with so many top secret clearances, over 1 million or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's pretty shocking that it doesn't
Yeah.
things don't get leaked more.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it even starts at which they realize later on, at the lowest level of the basic rule is when you get up from your desk, if when you get up from your desk, whatever it is, you pull your card, Control Alt Delete and lock your screen, you do something. And from what I understand, this kid had nothing to do with these programs, but he was some kind of a repairman, like telephone or something, where he was able to get access to these desks. And people are just leaving just leaving their screens open. Hey, I'm going to go, I don't want to stand over your shoulder. I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. Or they just walked away for whatever reason, and he's able to see these things. And that's like 101 when you first start these jobs is lock your computer screen, put all your classified away before you leave your desk.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was it. I wonder whether that was the command just covering its ass, rather than admitting, oh yeah, we let all these dudes need to know. It's much easier to say, oh, it wasn't our fault. It was the fault of all these guys who leave their ID cards in their computer
and that absolutely could be the case. Could be.
It could be the case, but that's a very risky way to do it.
Yeah.
If you're going around other people's workstations while they go to the head or something and trying to bullshit, I just don't buy that. I think it was just the unit fucked up, and they just didn't have enough kahunas to admit it.
Yeah, and I think with this latest leak, I think more damaging, if that's going to happen, would be the butterfly effect of this, as in the trust between the United States and Israel. As also too, it could be used here as a talking point politically. Like, look what happened under your administration, that sort of thing. So those butterfly effects are, to me, more concerning than the actual leak itself.
Yeah, no, that's 100% correct. I couldn't agree more. It puts us at a negotiating disadvantage to the Israelis. All right, no longer can we, point out the stuff that's happened there, massive intelligence failures, massive operational failures, blah blah blah, because we had them of our own, and it's just embarrassing. That's what it is, and it's not good to be embarrassed as a nation, right? And we're going to get comments about that, but No, arguably we shouldn't be embarrassed. I mean, these things happen, and they happen because we United States are trying to do the right thing in the area. I'm sounding very facile here, I realize. And before long, I'm going to be accused of being a patriot.
How dare you?
But of course, I believe that. So what about the Middle East? I mean, if we have if we've talked through all of that, I want to talk about these 3,000 North Korean dudes who popped up now in Ukraine. I mean, not in Ukraine yet, in Russia, preparing to go to Ukraine. Well, I think we talked about this before, right? That there were multiple newspaper reports, most notably in the Wall Street Journal, that 10 to 12,000 North Korean troops were on their way to Russia to fight on the side of Russia in the Ukraine conflict. And that news brought much speculation among, think tanks are us about the quality of these troops, et cetera, et cetera. General consensus being, hey, this is something to worry about because sheer numbers. Okay. Number two, North Korea is likely to send their best, okay, out of a 1 million man army. So even if, the majority are malnourished and illiterate peasants, the ones they send overseas are likely to have been prepared for this. The third is that they're definitely sending their special forces, right? And anyone who's studied the Korean Peninsula problem knows that North Korean special forces, while, probably not, certainly not, near peer, are a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
And 12,000 is a lot of dudes to pour into conflict like that. So this is definitely a concern, but the United States government said, and we've heard nothing about this either to support or deny it. Well, in the last day, yesterday, the South Korean National Intelligence Service director, doesn't matter his name, but Cho Tae-yong, right, said that there are already 1,500 North Korean troops in Russia. Yeah. He didn't specify where, but if you look on Twitter, there is some geolocation work that shows exactly where. It means nothing to me, obviously. It's fairly near the Ukrainian border, but it's not in Ukraine yet. So 1,500 troops already there, and no, I'm sorry, 3,000 already there. It was initial 1,500, another 3,000, and they're expecting a total of 10,000 by December. All right, so in the next 6 weeks. Now, what geolocation was suggesting was that these guys were all arriving in one place and then being distributed to multiple military bases for training. But they are, they haven't been deployed into battle yet. So they're going through some kind of training with Russian military instructors, in the Russian military blogosphere confirms that. And interestingly enough, there's a comment here. There was a comment somewhere about the Russians instructors about the troops saying that, they're surprisingly good quality troops. This could just be propaganda. But yeah, and that they're eager to get into the fight, but nevertheless they're likely to take massive casualties because they know nothing about modern warfare. I mean, North Korea has not been at war since the Korean War, right? So this is an interesting development, and I think it's, though, an indication of kind of the desperation that the Russians have for manpower right now. In addition to the troops, the North Koreans have sent, so apparently, according to South Korea, 13,000 containers of artillery, missile, and other conventional arms to Russia since August of last year. So that's a lot of freight. 13,000. It doesn't say what size containers these are, I'm assuming. But if those, regardless, if these are like airlifts. I mean, a single platform airlift, then that is a hell of a lot. In just a year.
I got a question.
Now,
what does North Korea get out of sending potentially 10,000 troops right now, 3,000, and all the equipment, all the shells and everything like that? Like, what do they stand to gain out of it?
Yeah, that's the really scary part, D. Who knows? Help with their nuclear weapon development, perhaps.
Yeah, like tech help. Yeah.
I mean, help with their missile program, which is which has been coming along faster than we want anyway. That's where they could really use help. And then, of course, money. North Korea is always strapped for cash.
Also, too, they signed that agreement in June to back each other in the case of external aggression. So, if in the unlikely chance that North Korea decides to pour across the border to the south again, they could turn and be like, hey, guess what you promised us? So that's in their back pocket as well.
Yeah. Yeah, just not I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. But my point is that the big news here might not be the troops themselves. The big news is what the Russians are giving the North Koreans in return, at least from U.S. foreign policy. And that's concerning. So, D, I know we're coming to an end of our inaugural episode as a separate channel under the Team House franchise. And if you haven't already done so, everyone, please click subscribe now. By the end of the day, our goal is to amass as many subscribers as Team House Main.
More, a million.
A million.
Yeah, subscribe. Nice. Yeah, please subscribe. So the next few episodes we will be posting on the Team House channel and on Eyes On's new channel, just to do a little bit of cross promotion. So don't forget, the link is in the description. Hit the like, hit the subscribe for the new Eyes On podcast channel, please.
And his, this kind of caught my eye. I think it's kind of an interesting point to end on, a nostalgic point, perhaps. This day in 1983. Operation Urgent Fury began. That was the invasion of Grenada, and some of you, you weren't alive back then.
Nope.
But those of us who were, remember, it was another turbulent time. The Marines had lost, some 241 Marines in the explosion in Beirut on October. It was the 23rd, I believe, 1983. So it had just happened, and the very next day, the decisions made to go to Grenada using a combined joint force involving Army Rangers, Special Forces, and of course the Marines, 8th Marines. Those of you who have seen that iconic movie Heartbreak Ridge will know the story in its entirety. But an important part of Urgent Fury was we learned how fucked up we are when we do joint operations. Urgent Fury was like a massive exercise. It was, I know Urgent Fury veterans will be upset at me saying this, but it wasn't combat. It was a massive exercise, and we didn't do well. We really didn't. We struggled, everything. Even in the Marine Corps, we struggled with air-ground coordination, which we prize ourselves on. There's that iconic but probably apocryphal story about a forward air controller trying to call in an airstrike using a payphone. Whether or not that is true, it's indicative of some of the issues that that we had there on the ground. There were fratricide issues. There were all kinds of stuff. We learned that we needed more jointness, and at the tactical level, we learned that we weren't as good as we wanted to be, or thought we were. Anyway, so the legacy of Urgent Fury, and that brings us nicely to a closing time, fellas. Yeah. Unless you have any alibis or questions, or
I have some more housekeeping. Andy Milburn's book and his Twitter and everything is down in the description. The best way to support both the Team House and Eyes On, besides subscribing to the new channel, which the link is in the description, is go to patreon.com/teamhouse. All that information is down below. I make it easy for everybody. Please check it out.
Please do. Everyone, until the next episode in a few days. Thank you for tuning in.